All right, so are you ready to dive into something kind of spooky?
Always up for a good scare.
Well, this one, it's called Trip to Bhangarh, a terrifying tale, and it's a classic ghost story.
Ooh, yeah, I read this one. It really makes you think, about how much of what we experience, well, how much is actually real and how much is just our own minds playing tricks on us.
Exactly, like that whole thing about fear. I mean, when we're scared, we tend to see things, hear things that might not actually be there, right?
Oh, absolutely. Fear can really distort our perceptions.
Okay, so let's get into the story. We've got these 5 friends, Rohit, Karan, Nikhil, Shreya, and Anjali.
All college students, right? Looking for a little adventure.
Yeah, and they decide to visit, well, where else? Bhangarh Fort in India.
The place is practically legendary for its spooky stories.
Right. And the story kind of sets up this conflict right from the beginning, this tension between skepticism and belief.
Like the friends are doing all this research online.
Oh yeah, they find all these warnings.
Like, don't stay after sunset, people have disappeared.
But of course, being the adventurous college students they are, they just brush it off.
Think they're invincible, right?
Probably, yeah. But it is interesting, though, that one of the friends, Anjali, she's actually hesitant about the whole trip.
Uh-huh. Almost like she's got this, bad feeling about it.
Yeah, it's that classic horror movie trope, Brett.
The one character who senses danger, but no one listens.
Exactly. So Anjali, she's like the voice of reason. But the others, they're just, well, they're too excited about the adventure to pay attention to her warnings.
It kind of makes you wonder, though, what if someone, someone they really respected, had given them that same warning? Would they have taken it more seriously then?
That's a good question. Maybe, maybe not. But anyway, our intrepid adventurers, ignoring Anjali's misgivings, they arrive at Bhangarh. And even in broad daylight, the place has got this unsettling vibe.
The story does a really good job of setting the scene. You can almost feel the creepiness, seeping out of the very stones of the fort.
Right. It's described as this deserted place, surrounded by dense trees, all crumbling ruins and shadows.
It's like the fort itself is a character in the story. This, silent, watchful presence.
And then we get this classic horror movie moment.
Yep.
The ominous warning from a local.
Oh, yeah, the old shopkeeper.
Exactly. He tells them to leave before sunset. Practically word for word what they read online.
He's like the voice of local wisdom, passing down the legends, But of course, our young friends, they just laugh it off. Superstition, they think.
Typical, right? Young and reckless. So they start exploring the fort, and it just gets creepier and creepier.
Oh yeah, they find all these broken rooms, collapsed ceilings, dark corners. You can practically feel the goosebumps rising just listening to the description.
And of course, Shreya and Anjali, they're starting to get really uneasy. But the guys, they just joke about their overactive imaginations.
Trying to act tough, nothing can scare them.
Yeah, it's that whole bravado thing. But I think it's also interesting how the story kind of plays with gender roles here.
How?
Well, it's the women who are more attuned to the danger, who are more intuitive, while men are the ones dismissing their fears.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's subtly challenging those traditional horror movie tropes.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes you wonder if maybe those tropes, those gendered expectations, they kind of contribute to the way we perceive fear and danger in real life, too.
That's a really interesting point. How much of our reactions to fear are shaped by what we've been taught, by those cultural narratives that we've internalized?
Right. Okay, so back to the story. Things start to get even weirder as the sun begins to set. Anjali feels a touch on her shoulder, but when she turns around, there's no one there.
That's always creepy, that feeling of being watched, of something unseen brushing past you.
And then Karan sees this fleeting shadow. He thinks it's one of his friends, but when he calls out, no one answers.
Those little isolated events, they're like the story's way of building suspense, each one chipping away at their sense of security.
Yeah, like the calm before the storm. And as darkness descends and the temperature drops, they decide to explore the main part of the fort.
Which in a horror story is never a good idea. It's like they're practically begging for something to happen.
And something does happen. They hear this blood-curdling scream echoing through the ruins.
And that's when the real terror begins.
Right. Like their worst nightmares are about to come true.
Okay.
But last we left off, our friends are trapped inside this supposedly haunted fort. What happens next?
Well, the story takes a bit of a turn, It moves from that immediate, in-your-face terror to something even more unsettling. It shifts to the aftermath of their experience.
Oh, I see. So it's not just about the scares, it's about the lasting impact of what they went through.
Exactly. The story picks up the next morning when some villagers find the friends, unconscious, outside the fort. But for two of them, Karan and Anjali, the horror isn't over.
Oh no, what happens to them?
Well, they're deeply traumatized, like really messed up by what they experienced. They keep repeating this one phrase over and over. She won't leave us. She's here.
Oh wow, that's chilling. It's like whatever they encountered in that fort, it attached itself to them somehow.
Yeah, and this is where the story really starts to explore the psychological effects of trauma, you know? Even though they're physically safe now, their minds are still trapped in that nightmare.
It's like they brought the horror back with them.
Right. And what's interesting is how the story shows us different responses to that trauma. Anjali and Karan, they're completely overwhelmed by it. They can't cope, they can't function.
So what happens to them?
They end up being institutionalized. Like, they're so traumatized they can't recover.
That's so sad. It really shows how a single event, something truly terrifying, can have such a devastating impact on someone's life.
And it makes you think about how trauma manifests differently in different people. Some folks, they shut down, they withdraw. Others, they become almost consumed by their fear.
Right, like everyone processes these things in their own way.
Yeah.
So what about the other friends? Rohit, Bikal, and Shreya. How do they react?
They react with silence, each of them in their own way. Rohit and Nikhil, they refuse to talk about what happened. It's like they're trying to pretend it never happened.
But I bet they can't really forget it, can they? I mean, how could you?
Exactly. It's like this unspoken thing that hangs over them. And then there's Shreya. She drops out of school and moves away.
Wow, so they all deal with it by trying to escape it in some way. But the memory, it's still there, haunting them.
Right. And that silence, their refusal to talk about it, it speaks volumes, you know? It suggests that the experience was so profound, so terrifying, that they can't even find the words to describe it.
Yeah, it's like their silence is a testament to the power of what they experienced.
Yeah.
So with all this talk about trauma and silence, I have to ask, does the story ever reveal what really happened in that fort?
That's the thing, it doesn't. And I think that's what makes it so effective. It leaves us, the readers, with this lingering question. What really happened that night? Was it a genuine encounter with the supernatural? Was it some kind of collective hallucination brought on by fear and the power of suggestion? Or was it something else entirely? We're never given a definitive answer.
So it's like the story is inviting us to fill in the blanks with our own fears and interpretations.
Exactly. And by leaving that question open, it allows the terror to linger, to seep into our own imaginations. We're left wondering, what would I have experienced if I had been there? What would I have seen?
That's a pretty powerful technique. It makes the story much more personal, much more unsettling than if it had just given us a straightforward explanation.
I agree. And it plays on our own anxieties about the unknown. It forces us to confront the possibility that maybe, sometimes, there are no easy answers. Maybe some mysteries are best left unsolved.
Okay, so the story doesn't give us a clear answer, but it does give us these incredibly vivid descriptions of the fort itself and this terrifying figure that Shreya sees. What do you make of those details? Are they just meant to scare us, or do you think there's something more to them?
Well, I think those details are crucial because they're the things that really stick with us. You know, they're the images that haunt our dreams. But I also think they serve a deeper purpose. They represent the things that the characters, and by extension, we, the readers, are most afraid of.
So, like the fort itself, with its crumbling walls and dark corners, it represents the decay of time, the loss of control, maybe even our own mortality.
Exactly. And the figure that Shreya sees, with its disfigured face and black eyes, it represents the unknown, the things that we can't comprehend, the things that lie just beyond the edges of our understanding.
It's like the story is tapping into our primal fears, the things that have haunted humanity since the dawn of time.
And by giving those fears a physical form, by putting them right there in front of us, it makes them all the more terrifying. It makes us question our own sanity, our own perceptions of reality.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that makes this story so effective. It's not just about ghosts and monsters. It's about the darkness that exists within us all, the things that we try to hide from, the things that we're afraid to confront.
It reminds us that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones that go bump in the night. They're the ones that we carry around inside of us.
And it suggests that maybe, just maybe, the most haunted place of all is our own mind. You know, it's funny, even though we don't get a straight answer about what happened in that fort, the story still manages to be so creepy.
I know what you mean, like it's almost scarier not knowing you know, because then our imaginations can run wild.
Right. Like we start filling in the blanks with our own fears and anxieties.
It's like the story is inviting us to confront the possibility that maybe sometimes there are no easy answers.
Yeah, and that can be a pretty scary thought in itself, huh? To think that there are things out there, forces beyond our understanding that we just can't control or explain.
And it makes you think about how our own backgrounds, our cultures and beliefs, they kind of shape how we see the supernatural too.
Oh, that's a really interesting point. So, like someone who's not familiar with the legends of Bhangarh Fort, they might interpret this story completely differently than someone who grew up hearing those stories.
Exactly. It's like the fort becomes this blank slate onto which we project our own fears and beliefs.
So it's not just about individual fear, it's also about collective cultural anxieties.
I think so, yeah.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive. So, what can we take away from Trip to Bhangarh? A terrifying tale. I know it's a story that's definitely stayed with me.
Me too. Yeah, I think it reminds us that fear, it's complex.
Yeah.
It's often rooted in the unknown. And while it can be paralyzing, it can also be a catalyst for self-discovery.
It makes you think about those times when you've been confronted with something unsettling, something that challenged your own sense of reality. Did you embrace the mystery, or did you try to explain it away? Did you run from it or lean into it?
And how did that experience, however you explain it, ultimately change you? Change how you see the world and your place in it?
That's something to think about for sure. It seems like this deep dive has opened up more questions than it has answered. Maybe that's a good thing.
Maybe the best stories are the ones that stay with us, that keep us thinking and wondering.
And maybe even keep us sleeping with the lights on for a few nights.
A little healthy fear can keep us on our toes, Remind us that the world is a vast and mysterious place.
Well said. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and maybe keep a flashlight handy, just in case.